On today's show, we'll discuss the growth of West Africa's mobile economy. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag #BeyondMarkets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Ugbodaga. Now, the mobile adoption in West Africa has grown rapidly in recent years, and by the end of 2017, there were 176 million unique subscribers across the region. Now, this is according to GSMA. However, despite the remarkable subscriber growth, more than half of the region's population do not yet subscribe to a mobile service. Akinwale Goodluck, head of Sub-Saharan Africa GSMA, joins me now to discuss the mobile economy in West Africa. Akinwale, thank you so much. Pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much.
Quite an interesting and thorough, robust report on the mobile economy, especially here in West Africa. We've seen the numbers grow in the last couple of years, and we've seen that demographic shift. But let's hear your thoughts in terms, let's start with the growth that we've seen so far in the ecosystem.
Well, I think that the growth has been quite remarkable. At the end of 2017, we had about 176 million unique mobile subscribers in West Africa. If you compare that with the total number of SIM connections, that's in excess of 300 million SIM connections. So definitely the market is growing in West Africa. It's the fastest growing sub-region in Africa. And
your report points to the fact that the growth is underpinned or supported by a demographic shift. Can you speak to that point?
Well, yes, we are seeing very encouraging results from the demographics in West Africa in terms of the total population sizes, in terms of youth population, in terms of new emerging subscribers, and also in terms of population shifts from rural to urban areas.
And looking at the numbers too, Nigeria, obviously the largest market in Africa, because of our population, contributing more than half of the total subscribers in 2017. But you listed all the 5 other countries, the likes of Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Niger. In terms of market share, would you say that in those individual 5 countries, how would you describe annual growth for them compared to the kind of annual growth that we have in Nigeria, the largest market?
Well, I think the growth rates in most of the countries have been very bullish. You know, like all over the world, we are seeing a slowdown. So definitely it's not growing as fast as it was. But compared to the rest of Africa and compared to the rest of the world, the markets in all those countries, and particularly in West Africa, continues to grow.
Well, but what about the other West African nations outside of the 5 and Nigeria? How would you describe their own growth rates?
Their growth rates are good. There are a lot of things that the governments need to do in a lot of the countries to further enable growth. There's a significant need for regulatory modernization. There's need for also to revisit the way licenses are issued. We need greater liberalization of licensing regimes. I think that governments also must begin to understand the trade-off between stimulating more access, more services, vis-a-vis treasury receivables from spectrum fees and licensing fees.
Okay, because what was going through my mind was, okay, these 5 countries in Nigeria are all moving upwards, and we have these other countries. Yeah, many of them are small countries, but I'm also thinking to myself, is it a broadband penetration issue? And we know we've seen the established link between broadband penetration and economic growth. Firms, businesses, individuals, they all need this to grow, you know, for better efficiency in their businesses. So I'm just thinking, are these countries going to be left behind?
Well, look, I think that, again, you know, I use the word encouraging. If you look at the West Africa markets today, we have close to 63G networks spread across 15 countries. As at the end of March, I think we're close to 30 4G networks. So again, you're going to see increasing broadband penetration. And as we see the prices of smartphones come down, we see again liberalization and issue of more 4G licenses, the conclusion of the digital dividend and the allocation to mobile. These are things that will stimulate growth in all the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, we'll talk about 3G and 4G later on, but still going back to the report, it says that despite this growth that we've seen, more than half of the West African population are not yet subscribed to a mobile service. Can you speak to that point?
Well, West Africa is, it's a big geographical entity, and it's the playoff again between infrastructure economics and the realities on the ground in West Africa. There is a need for governments and operators and all stakeholders to work and sort of examine and explore how we can better connect the unconnected. So it's going to be, government must give incentives to make the MNOs go into some of the urban, rural areas. The economics, the operating model in those places must change. MNOs are businesses, and they will typically put their Capex into places where they will get their returns. So there's a trade-off by all parties. I
was going to talk about, Capex by the operators themselves, the infrastructure providers. How would you describe what they're going through in quote? Because I know that, you're not going to go into an area where you're not going to get good investment returns. So in terms of the amount of Capex that's been invested as we speak to get those numbers up, how would you describe that?
Well, the mobile industry is a very Capex-intensive industry. It's a very, very Capex intensive industry. I think over the next 3 years, between now and 2020, we envisage that operators will spend approximately $8 billion in Capex. This is money they're going to put in the ground in West Africa. And it then means that, government must encourage the operators, must give...
I get a sense that you don't believe that government is doing enough at this point.
Well, I think that
when we say encourage, or, well, as we put it sometimes, providing a conducive business environment.
Absolutely.
Can we put it that way also? So would you say that, maybe to a large extent, the government is failing or not doing enough in that regard?
I think a lot of governments in West Africa understand what is required to be done to deliver the sort of connectivity ratios we would like to see, the development, mobile adoption,
so would that be
broadband
spending on the part of the government
adoption.
For the government to also spend in that regard?
I'm not sure it's about spending on the part of government. I think it's about government saying that, well, look, what is our objective? We want the MNOs to connect as many people as possible. What can we do to make this easier for them? How do they get planning approvals? How do they get rights of way approvals? How do we simplify permitting regimes across West Africa? How do, these are the sort of conversations that government needs to be having with industry. And then the operators also have to come and say, well, how can we do smarter infrastructure? So then you begin to talk about things like infrastructure sharing. You move from passive infrastructure sharing, you begin to look at active infrastructure sharing. You begin to look at innovative ways to reduce cost and make services available.
I think that's already happening in Nigeria. Areas. We have a broadband blueprint, a roadmap, 2020 if I'm correct, and I know that the government wants a certain amount of penetration by that time. Yeah. And I'm thinking that so that will mean that the government is already working with our own operators here in Nigeria, right?
Absolutely. I think that Nigeria has a very, very bullish broadband policy. And broadband, the government recognizes that broadband is a necessary catalyst for growth for the economy. So the right conversations are happening. Nigeria is on the way to achieving those broadband targets. There's still a lot to be done in Nigeria and indeed in all other countries in West Africa on the part of government and also on the part of operators.
But you've mentioned a number of challenges, but what would you say is that one key challenge that's still holding that industry from Nigeria, the entire West African continent, region?
Okay. The issues of access are not, it's not only in West Africa. I'll give you an example. What has happened in France recently is that the government, in terms of licensing 4G, did not go the old model of, I'm going to auction them and make as much money as possible. What has happened is that the government in France has sat down with operators and said, we want you to take services to everywhere in France. We want you to provide services on train routes, travel routes. We want you to provide services in the rural areas. How much investment will you make? And we will trade that off for you in terms of license fees. So show me the money you're going to spend. Show me the Capex you're going to put in the ground. And we will give you a corresponding discount in terms of spectrum and license fees. So this is a model that I think can be looked at and adopted in West Africa.
Well, in a region like this where we have budget deficits and of course competing demands at the fiscal level where government is looking for cash to fund infrastructure, I'm thinking that, do you think that it might take a while for us to get to that point? Because the government does need the money when it auctions those the 4G, the 3G. Yes,
but I think it's a question of let's not tax upfront. Let's allow the mobile sector to enable growth,
first,
develop and build a bigger economy, will bake a bigger cake, and then government can have its way, can tax, it would, there'll be employment. So it's a win-win situation.
Hopefully the government will be able to see that soon. Now, I'm looking at some of the numbers going forward. You say your report says that from now to 2025, 72 million new subscribers will be added to the West African region. What will be the key driver of that growth?
Well, I think that we're going to see operators will continue to deploy infrastructure. We will see more 3G and 4G networks in West Africa. We will see the price of smartphones continue to come down, and more people. So the mobile broadband adoption will increase significantly. These are all the things that will drive penetration.
So all those usual indicators that point to growth that are happening now,
yes,
you see them scaling up over the years, in the next couple of years, that will get us to that 72 million extra. Well, Akinwale will take a quick break. Thank you for your time so far. We'll take a quick break. And we'll be right back with the rest of our discussion. I've been speaking to Akinwale Goodluck. He's the head of Sub-Saharan Africa at GSMA. Still with me in the studio is Akinwale Goodluck. He's the head of Sub-Saharan Africa at GSMA, and we're continuing our conversation on the growth of West Africa's mobile economy. Akinwale, thank you for your time so far.
Pleasure.
Now, we're seeing this growth happening across the continent, but some regions are a little ahead of others. Kenya is a good example. East Africa, Kenya leading that surge forward in terms of mobile money, for instance. Kenya's M-Pesa has revolutionized that sector, and we talk a lot about how other regions can learn from Kenya's story. But what is your perspective on that?
Yes, I mean, I think that Kenya has been very successful in using M-Pesa to drive financial inclusion. And, it's something that is being replicated in other parts of Africa. We've seen strong growth in Ivory Coast. We're seeing very strong growth in Ghana. I think today, even in Ghana, with the launch of an IPO by MTN, mobile money is being used as a tool to drive the sale of the shares. So for sure, mobile money is the way to go. Nigeria is not is not where all the other countries are at, and there are various reasons responsible for this. Today, Nigeria probably has one of the most sophisticated financial technology regime in terms of capacity, in terms of infrastructure, but we also need enabling regulation to drive mobile money adoption in Nigeria. There's always a lot of concern that the mobile sector will overwhelm the banking sector. I mean,
I think that's a legitimate argument when you take a look at what the fintech guys are doing in that space.
Yeah, I mean, the world is about disruption, but again, that is also a myth, because even if you look at Kenya, which is the poster boy for mobile money, today there are more bank accounts than mobile money accounts in Kenya. And what this has proven and demonstrated is that if the two industries can work together, then there's room for growth for everybody. Today in Kenya, there are more bank accounts directly linked to people's mobile phones and their mobile wallets, 100%, within the banking system. So again, these are myths that we need to address to ensure that we can have this sort of enabling regulations in Nigeria that will drive mobile money adoption.
And we'll also talk about financial inclusion and how mobile money also helps in that regard. Going into communities that are unbanked and using mobile technology to, to achieve that. So what are your thoughts on Nigeria's financial inclusion drive? How we're using this mobile technology to increase our numbers? Look,
I mean, clearly the answer is very simple, is that we must have the sort of legislation and regulation that will allow the MNOs, the mobile network operators, to play a bigger role.
We're back to regulations.
It will. That's the only thing. Once that happens, things will scale, and they will scale very rapidly.
Specifically, what kind of regulation? I don't know. I want you to put a name to. What kind of regulations do you think that we should have right now to move that needle?
Well, today the regulations specifically restricting the role that MNOs can play. Those regulations will have to be reversed, turned on their head, and MNOs must be licensed to play in that space. Of course, within rules and regulations, but MNOs must be given a bigger sphere to play in that space.
Okay, so for Kenya's example, what is that one lesson that Nigeria should learn from Kenya?
I think that if you look at Kenya and the convenience that M-Pesa has brought to Kenya and the financial inclusion goals and targets that it has achieved. I think that, industry, the financial sector, the telecommunications sector must all take a step back and look at what is good for the country and how we can bring more people into the financial bracket. And that should be the main driver.
Now, you've talked about also in the report infrastructure gaps. We've talked about that also earlier. But your report says that tech hubs can also see that as an opportunity and, to drive innovation in that space. Tell us more about that.
Well, there's a lot of development going on all over the world. And if you see, a lot of those developments are coming out of tech hubs. West Africa is beginning to see a significant amount of tech hubs. Nigeria, Benin, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Senegal, all have very, very good and thriving tech hubs. But again, there can never be enough. Support is required, access is important, and they must also have the ability to scale. So you don't only develop, but you must have the ability to scale. At the GSMA, we have been behind giving a lot of grants to different tech startups across the world, and there is a push to get more and more into Africa. But again, we're seeing that a lot of the tech startups are struggling to scale. They have fantastic ideas. So again, there's a need for collaboration between all the sector players and, of course, also
I was just going to ask you that, the level of collaboration, scaling, that is so important because that's what's going to drive the numbers up. So how would you describe the level of collaboration right now? And what do you think they should do to take things a step further?
Okay, I think that parties are talking. Everybody's saying the right things, but there are practical steps that need to be taken. And some of these steps are steps that also probably impact other people who are in innovation or people who are starting businesses, entrepreneurs. We need to make things a lot easier. Some of the things in terms of the new, the revised Companies and Allied Matters Act, I think will address some of those things. But government needs to be on its toes. Industry needs to be on its toes. We need to continue to see innovation and, let's remove the obstacles so that our young people can grow.
Speaking about obstacles, what about the supranational level, like ECOWAS, for instance? What kind of conversations should ECOWAS be driving at this time to help improve the industry?
Well, ECOWAS, I must say, is one of the more advanced regional economic communities, and the right conversations, again, are happening at ECOWAS. ECOWAS is championing a lot of things, so you can see that ECOWAS is very involved in roaming, it's very involved in child online protection, a lot of the things that matter. ECOWAS has been quite a responsible regional economic community.
Let's talk about the population, because part of your report says that in Sub-Saharan Africa alone, more than 40% of the subscribers or users are below the age of 16 years. We've talked about, every time we have a conversation about mobile money or mobile economy, we always talk about the age groups and how they're categorized, and we always find out that young adults under 16 or just between 16 and 21 are the dominant in terms of demographics. How do you see this section of the population helping to contribute to the growth of mobile economy in terms of, maybe mobile usage, mobile phone usage, etc.?
Well, interesting. One, of course, they will contribute to the growing number of unique mobile subscribers. But I think what will be particularly interesting will be that we will see a faster rate of mobile broadband adoption. We will see bigger content requirements, bigger content consumption, bigger content generation. So, the 16 to 20 block is going to be where there's going to be a lot of development. Their demands will be different. It's all going to be about data for them.
Do you think that the operators themselves are doing enough research work to determine the needs of that particular age group? When we talk about the millennials, the Generation Z, the Generation X, and I don't know what's coming up, what's going to come after that. But what we hear is that they're getting more smart in terms of what they need and wanting a more personalized service, something that they can really connect with. Do you think that, to what extent do you think this puts pressure on the operators themselves to make their services tailored to the needs of this demographic or these age groups?
I think that operators and, again, all the other players in the system must address and meet the demands of the market. Things are going to change in the way people do everything. The customary players who are providing a service today, in another 3-5 years, will definitely not be providing the services. If you look at banking, for instance, everybody will still require banking services, but it will be provided by all manner of people, all manner of players.
And I'm seeing that the brick and mortar, may be fading away, but
absolutely,
bank CEOs may have a different view on that.
I mean, in a few years, your banker may be Facebook, your banker may be WhatsApp, your banker may be your social media platform. So, this is the way the world is going, and I think that the operators in West Africa are also quite nimble. If you look at the operators across West Africa, most of them come from very strong operator groups with a lot of support in terms of innovation, in terms of where the industry is going. So I think we're in for very exciting times.
Now we're talking about how Africa can be at par or move with the changing times, with what's going on at the global stage. We're seeing we talked about 5G. We're looking at issues like artificial intelligence, and I'm thinking to myself, can Africa prioritize in time enough and in time to be at par with what's going on at the global stage right now? And would you say Africa is well represented when they're at the global stage and those conversations are being held?
Yes, I think that we are definitely headed in the right direction in Africa. I was at the Mobile World Congress in February earlier this year, and there were very, very strong conversations and roundtables around 5G. And the level of participation from African countries, both African, Francophone, Anglophone countries, these were very robust sessions, and it was good to see African ministers, African regulators contributing actively and, being part of the larger, seeing the larger picture. So that is very encouraging.
So when you look into the future, 5-10 years from now, we're talking about 4G, we're talking about 5G. Do you see Africa also playing catch up, being able to leapfrog, or at least being there, deploying that level of technology, 5G, 4G? Absolutely.
As we speak today, we already have operators in Africa who are trialing 5G already. I envisage that we will see 1 or 2 commercial launches perhaps in about 2 to 3 years. And of course, riding on top of that will be a lot of services. We will see a lot of investment in IoT and all the other things that are going on all over the world. Already, those things are happening in Africa. We will see a lot more cities going the way of smart cities. We will see. It will be phased, it will be gradual, but we will get there.
Okay. Akinwale, thank you so much for talking to us today. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Akinwale Goodluck, Head of Sub-Saharan Africa at GSMA, looking at West Africa's mobile economy.